Hello and welcome to Speckled Speech. My name is Nalinne Jones and today I am reading Chapter 8 of Book 2 of the Brothers Karamazov, and it is called A Scandalous Scene. Please subscribe. Being a well-bred and sincerely decent man, Musov underwent a rapid process of self-examination as he entered the Father Superior's rooms with Ivan, as a result of which he grew ashamed of having lost his temper. He felt that he should have sufficiently despised that old wretch Karamazov not to have lost his own composure in the elder's cell as he had done. In any case, he decided as he crossed the threshold of the Father Superior's rooms, the monks were not to blame for anything, and if, here too, they were such respectable men, quote, I believe Father Superior Nikolai himself comes from the gentry, why not be courteous and polite with them? I won't get involved in any arguments, he promised himself. In fact, I'll try to agree with them. I'll overwhelm them with graciousness and I'll prove to them that I have nothing in common with that Aesop, that clown, that ridiculous Pierrot, that I was in his company by sheer bad luck, just as everyone else was. As to the contested wood-cutting and fishing rights, he wasn't actually too sure which streams and woods were involved. He decided to concede them to the monastery once and for all, that very day, especially since it would cost him very little. He would drop all his lawsuits against the monastery. All these good intentions were further strengthened when they entered the Father Superior's dining room. It was not really a dining room, since the Father Superior had only 2 rooms altogether. They were larger and more comfortable than the elders, but the furnishings were not very lavish either. The chairs were mahogany, covered with leather in the old style of the 1820s, and the floors were not even stained, but everything was spotlessly clean, and there were beautiful flowers in the windows. The chief luxury on this occasion, of course, was a sumptuous table laden with choice foods, although even that luxury was relative. The tablecloth was immaculate. The plates and the silverware shone. There were 3 kinds of freshly baked bread, 2 bottles of wine, 2 bottles of the monastery's excellent mead, and a large jug of its kvass, which was famous throughout the district. No vodka was served at all. Later, Rakitin disclosed that 5 courses had been prepared for the meal: a sterlet soup with fish patties, then some excellent boiled fish prepared according to a special recipe, then salmon cutlets, then ice cream and stewed fruit, and finally a sort of blancmange. Rakitin sniffed all this out. He had connections in the Father Superior's kitchen too, and he could not resist having a look. Rakitin had connections everywhere, and he could always find out what was going on from various informants. He was a restless and envious man. He was a man, too, of considerable ability, of which he was very much aware, indeed, which, in his conceit, he tended to exaggerate. He felt sure that one day he would be an important man. Alyosha, who was very attached to him, worried because his friend was dishonest without realizing it. On the contrary, Rakitin, because he knew he would not have stolen money if he had found it lying on a table, believed himself to be scrupulously honest, and no one, not even Alyosha, could do anything to make him see differently. Rakitin's position at the monastery was too lowly for him to be invited to the Father Superior's table, but Father Joseph and Father Paisi were to be among the guests, as was another monk. They were already in the dining room when Musov, Kalganov, and Ivan Karamazov made their entrance. Maximov, the little landowner, was there too, waiting in a corner by himself. The monastery's Father Superior stepped into the middle of the room to welcome his guests. He was a tall, thin, but still vigorous old man with pepper and salt hair and a long, solemn, emaciated face. He bowed to them in silence, but this time they went up to him to receive his blessing. Musov even contemplated kissing his hand, but the Father Superior withdrew it before he had a chance. Ivan and Kalganov, however, underwent the complete ritual, culminating in a resounding kiss on the hand that blessed them like simple peasants. "We must apologize profoundly, Your Reverence," Musov started, smiling amiably, but speaking in a solemn and respectful tone, "for the absence of our companion, Mr. Fyodor Karamazov, who felt obliged for very good reasons to decline your invitation. When we were all in the elder Zosima's cell, Mr. Karamazov became carried away by his unfortunate feud with his son and said some things he should not have said. A few most inappropriate things, I dare say, but I believe your reverence has already been informed," Musov said, glancing at the monks. And so, realizing he was at fault and sincerely regretting his behavior, but being too embarrassed to come here and apologize in person, he asked his son Ivan and myself to convey to you his profound apologies and regrets. In brief, he hopes and intends to make amends for everything, begs you for your blessing, and beseeches you to forget what has happened." Musov finished. He was very pleased with himself as he uttered the final words of his speech, so pleased, in fact, that the last traces of his recent irritation were wiped away. Once again, he was the sincere lover of mankind. The Father Superior, who had listened to him with a solemn air, lowered his head slightly and replied, "I am very sorry that the gentleman has decided not to come. Perhaps by sharing this meal with us he would have learned to love us as we love him. And now, gentlemen, please be seated." First he went to the icon and said grace aloud. They all lowered their heads respectfully, and Maximov did so with special zeal, clasping his hands with particular fervor and reverence. And that was the moment that Fyodor Karamazov chose to produce his final surprise. It must be said, though, that he really had wanted to leave, for he realized that, after his disgraceful display in the elder's cell, he could hardly appear at the Father Superior's lunch as if nothing at all had happened. This was not really because he was too embarrassed or too angry. It would not be appropriate for him to attend the party. When his ramshackle carriage drove up to the doorway of the inn to pick him up, however, and he was already climbing into it, he suddenly stopped. He remembered what he himself had said in the elder's cell, that whenever he appeared among people he always felt they considered him the most despicable of men, and that his usual reaction at those moments was to say to himself, "Well, if that's so, I'll act like the fool they think I am and show them that in reality they are stupider and more despicable than I am." And he felt an urge to punish the others for his own disgusting display. He also remembered that when someone had once asked him, "Why do you hate so-and-so so much?" he had answered in a fit of shameless buffoonery, "True, the fellow has never wronged me, but I have wronged him in the most disgusting, unscrupulous manner, and I have hated him ever since." He grew thoughtful for a second. He snorted wickedly, his eyes flashed, his lips quivered. "Well, once I've started something, I might as well finish it," he decided. His state of mind at that moment could be described as follows. Since it was not in his power to regain their respect, why shouldn't he go on and disgrace himself altogether, to show them that he could not care less what they thought of him? Ordering his driver to wait for him, he hurried back to the monastery and went straight to the Father Superior's rooms. He did not know exactly what he was going to do, but he did know that he was no longer in full control of himself, and that the least provocation could push him to the very limit, to some unspeakable abomination, although he knew he would not do anything for which he could be held legally punishable, and that he would never commit a crime. He could always stop himself before breaking the law, and at times he wondered at that himself. And so he appeared in the dining room at the very moment the Father Superior finished saying grace and everyone started to move toward the table to sit down. He stood in the doorway staring at them. Then he let out a long, arrogant, spiteful chuckle, and with a challenging glare in his eyes shouted, "So, you people thought I was gone, but here I am." They all gaped at him in silence, sensing that something disgraceful was about to happen. Something absurd that would end in a disgusting public exhibition. Within a second, Musov's mood switched from the utmost benignity to fury. The fire that had been subdued within him exploded and burst forth. "No, no," he cried. "I can't stand it. I can't. I won't." The blood rushed to his head. Feeling confused and unable to utter a word, he seized his hat. What is it he can't and won't stand? Tell me, your reverence, may I come in or not? Will you receive a fellow diner? You are most welcome, the Father Superior said. Gentlemen, he said suddenly, addressing the rest of the company, may I beg you to forget your past quarrels, and to be reunited in love and harmony, as befits relatives, and we will pray to God at our humble table. No, no, it is quite out of the question, Yusuf cried, still beside himself. Well, if he feels it's out of the question, then it's out of the question for me too. I won't stay either. I decided on my way here that now Mr. Yusuf and I will be inseparable. If he leaves, I'll leave. If he stays, I'll stay. You know, Father Superior, you hurt his feelings by mentioning family harmony. He refuses to acknowledge the fact that we're related. Isn't that so, Von San? It is Von San standing here, isn't it? Good afternoon, Von San. How are you? Are you addressing me, sir? Maximov muttered in amazement. Of course I am. Who else? You don't think I'll address the Father Superior as Von San, do you? But I'm not Von San either, sir. My name is Maximov. It isn't. It's Von San. By the way, your reverence, do you know who Von San really was? Well, there was a criminal proceeding. He was murdered in a house of ill fame. I believe that is how you refer to those establishments. He was murdered and robbed, and despite his vulnerable years, he was packed into a crate, which was nailed, labeled, and dispatched from Petersburg to Moscow in a freight train. While they were nailing up the crate, by the way, the harlot sang and played the psaltery, or was it the piano? That's who Von San is. So you've come back from the dead, have you, Von San? What's he talking about? What does he mean? Came the voices of the monks. Come on, we're leaving, Yusuf called out to Kolganov. Ah, no, just a moment, Karamazov cried shrilly, moving a step closer. First, you must let me finish. Back in the cell, I was reproached for disrespectful behavior, for yelling something about carp. My kinsman Peter Yusuf would rather speeches contained plus de noblesse que de sincérité, whereas I prefer mine to have plus de sincérité que de noblesse. Because I don't give a damn about noblesse. Am I right, Von San? Forgive me, Father Superior. I may be a buffoon and act like one, but I have a courtly idea of honor and must be allowed to speak my mind. Yes, sir, and while I'm filled with chivalry, Mr. Yusuf here is just a case of frustrated sensitivity. Perhaps I came to the monastery today to have a look around and then express my opinion. One of my sons, Alexei, he is seeking salvation here, and, being his father, it is my duty to concern myself about his future. All the time I was playing the fool, I was secretly listening and observing. And now it's time for me to give you the last act of my performance. Well, what's going on here? It looks as if when something falls here, it stays fallen. Once down, it will lie there to all eternity. I don't accept that. I want to rise again. I am outraged by you, holy fathers. A confession is a confession, a holy sacrament. I revere it and prostrate myself before it. But what did I find in that cell? I found all sorts of people kneeling and confessing aloud. Do you think it is really right to confess publicly? The Church Fathers decreed that confession should be whispered into the priest's ear, that only then it would be a sacrament. And so it has been since ancient times. How could you expect me, for instance, to explain to him in front of a whole audience that I have, well, done certain things? You can imagine what. Why, some of those things are not even mentionable, as you know. No, really, the whole thing is scandalous. The next thing you know, Holy Fathers, they'll be practicing flagellation in your monastery. I'll write and complain to the Holy Synod at the very first opportunity, and I'll have to take my son Alexei back home. It must be noted here that Karamazov had heard some things. All sorts of wicked rumors had been circulating about the goings-on in the monastery, and some of these stories, not only about our monastery, but also about others where the institution of elders had been introduced, had reached the bishop himself. They claimed that the elders were venerated at the expense of the Father Superiors, that they abused the sacrament of confession, and so on. These accusations were quite absurd. They were gradually dropped in our part of the country just as they were everywhere else. But some stupid devil, by manipulating his victim's nerves, was pushing Karamazov deeper and deeper into the pit of disgrace and making him formulate these discarded accusations, but which he did not understand the first thing. He had even failed to set them forth intelligently. After all, when he was in the cell, no one had knelt and confessed aloud, so he could not have seen anything of the sort and was just repeating old gossip that he somehow remembered. But having said it and feeling that he had made a stupid blunder, he was suddenly filled with an uncontrollable urge to prove to his audience, and even more to himself, that he had not really blundered, that what he had said was indeed very much to the point. And although he was conscious of sliding deeper and deeper into absurdity with every word he said, he was quite incapable of stopping and felt like someone slipping faster and faster down the side of a mountain. "Disgraceful!" Yusuf cried. "Allow me," the Father Superior interjected. "It was said long ago. Many have spoken out against me, saying evil things, and hearing them I said to myself, it is the healing of the Lord, and he has sent it to cure my vain soul. Therefore we thank you humbly, dear guest." He bowed waist deep to Karamazov. "Tut, tut, tut, the same old phrases, the same old hypocrisy, a pack of old lies, the old bowing that has become meaningless. We all know what it is worth, a kiss on the lips and a dagger in the heart, as in Schiller's Robbers. I don't like sham, fathers. What I'm after is truth, and it's not a carp that you're likely to find. Not a carp? Not in a carp that you're likely to find truth. I have said so before. Why do you keep fasting, fathers? Because you expect it to be credited to you in heaven? Why, for a reward, I would fast too. Now, fathers, try to be virtuous in life instead of confining yourselves inside the walls of a monastery with your meals assured and expecting a reward up there. That'll be more difficult. You see, Father Superior, I too can express myself nicely. Now let's see what we have here." He moved toward the table. "Why, but this is some nice old port, and that's good Medoc, bottled by the Yeliseyev brothers. Well done, fathers. That's no carp for you. Look at those lovely bottles, fathers. And who provided you with all that? It is the same hard-working old Russian mujik, laboring with his calloused hands, who brings his copper kopeck to you instead of giving it to his poor family or to the state. Why, holy fathers, don't you realize that you suck the blood of the poor?" "Now that's really an improper thing to say," Father Joseph, the monastery's librarian, remarked. Father Paisi remained stubbornly silent. Musov leaped up and rushed out of the room, followed by Kalganov. "Well, fathers, I must keep up with Mr. Musov. Goodbye now. I won't come back to pay you another visit, even if you beg me on bended knee. Since I sent you that 1,000 rubles, you've been eyeing me so sweetly, hoping, perhaps, for more. But you're wasting your efforts. You won't get another ruble. I paid you back now for my lost youth, for all the humiliations I had to suffer." He banged the table with his fist, carried away by his own play-acting. "This little monastery, though, meant so much to me," he went on. "How many bitter tears I have shed because of it. It was you who set my poor crazy wife against me. You anathematized me in the 7 cathedrals. You spread evil rumors about me all over the countryside. But it is finished, fathers. Now we live in an age of liberalism, railroads, and steamboats, and you'll never get another 1,000 rubles from me, or 100 rubles, or even a single kopeck." It must be noted again that our monastery had never played an important role in his life, and that Karamazov had never shed any tears because of it. But he was so carried away by his false misery that for a second he almost believed himself, and was so moved that he actually did shed a few sentimental tears. But he also knew that the time had come to leave. When Karamazov stopped spouting his stream of malicious slander, the Father Superior bowed his head and once more said solemnly, "It is also written, Bear with patience and fortitude the dishonor that befalleth thee, and hate not him who dishonoreth thee. We shall obey. Tut, tut, befalleth, dishonoreth, all the verbiage and claptrap. But while you dishonoreth thyself, I'll be off, and I'll use my parental authority to remove my son Alexei from here once and for all. And you too, Ivan, my respectful son, hear that I command thee to follow me from this place. And what about you, von Sohn? There's no point your staying around. Come back to town with me and pay me a visit. We'll have a bit of fun at my house. It's just a mile or so from here, and instead of their Lenten diet, you'll get a suckling pig for dinner, and I'll bring out some brandy for you, and then some liquor too. I have, for instance, a certain raspberry liqueur. So what do you say, von Sohn? You wouldn't want to miss such an opportunity, would you? He left, shouting and gesticulating. That was the moment when Rakitin caught sight of him and pointed him out to Alyosha. And when Karamazov saw his son, he called out to him, Alexei, I want you to move back home for good. Today. Bring your pillow and mattress too, and don't you ever dare set foot in here again. Alyosha stood motionless, watching in silence. Mr. Karamazov got into his carriage, and Ivan, grim and silent, was about to follow him without even turning to Alyosha to say goodbye. But at that moment, something almost unbelievably absurd took place, a worthy finale to the whole preposterous episode. The little landowner Maximov suddenly appeared at the step of the carriage. He was panting. He had run all the way to catch up with Karamazov before he drove off. Rakitin and Alyosha had seen him running. He was so anxious to get into the carriage that he put his foot on the step, although Ivan still had his left foot on it. Maximov nevertheless continued to pull himself up by the strap, trying to jump in, Ivan notwithstanding. I'm coming too, he shouted, wriggling and chuckling with delight. Take me with you. Wasn't I right? Mr. Karamazov shouted delightedly. Wasn't I right when I said this fellow was von Sohn? He's the true von Sohn, risen from the dead. But how did you manage to escape? What von Sohnish trick did you play on them? How could you leave the table? One needs the skin of an elephant to do that. I know mine is like that, but I'm surprised at you. Come on, jump in, friend, hurry. Let him in, Vanya, my son. We'll have great fun with him, and in the meantime he can lie somewhere between our feet. Or shall we put him on the box with the coachman? Jump up on the box, von Sohn. But Ivan, who had silently taken his seat, suddenly swung around, put his hands on Maximov's chest, and shoved him so violently that he landed a good 3 yards away, only by miracle remaining on his feet. Drive on, Ivan shouted angrily to the coachman. Why did you do that, Vanya? What's come over you? Karamazov protested, but Ivan didn't answer. Can't make you out, Karamazov said again after a 2-minute silence. This whole visit to the monastery was your idea, he said, looking angrily at Ivan. You suggested it. You insisted on it. So what's the matter with you now? Haven't you had enough nonsense yet? Ivan said grimly. Why don't you give yourself a rest for a while? Old Karamazov remained silent for another 2 minutes. Wouldn't it be nice to have a swig of brandy now? He asked conversationally. As Ivan didn't answer, he added, When we get home, we'll both have a drink. Ivan still ignored him. Karamazov waited 2 more minutes. But, however much you may disapprove, my dear Karl von Moor, I'm still determined to take Alyosha out of the monastery, he announced. Ivan glanced at him scornfully, shrugged, and turned away to look at the road. Not another word was uttered until they got home. That was chapter 8 and the end of book 2 of the Brothers Karamazov. Thank you for watching and listening. Please subscribe, please like the video, and we'll see you in the next one where I begin book 3, chapter 1. Book 3 is called The Sensualists, and chapter 1 is In the Servants' Quarter. We'll see you in the next video. Bye.